us. A Better Life for Livi is raising funds for Olivia Mulhern. She's 10 months old, she's from Meath, and she was diagnosed with SMA type 1. This is spinal muscular atrophy, and the diagnosis arrived back in April. And they need to raise €2 million for urgent medical treatment for Livi. Just today, they've acknowledged the incredibly generous donation of €1 million towards their fund from the Do It For Dan campaign. Both children suffer from the same condition. You'll remember the Do It For Dan campaign. It absolutely swept the country just as COVID hit, and they raised loads of money for Dan, about £3 million towards Dan's care earlier on in the year. But unfortunately, it has been decided that he is no longer a suitable candidate for the treatment. So Niall and Aisling Donoghue are now donating that money to other kids who need it. So Livi is now halfway towards the total, immediately on the back of the Do It For Dan campaign. It's a terrible story from the perspective of the Donoghues, but it's obviously a huge boost for Livi's campaign. So she's halfway towards the total now, and the hope is that the £2 million that is needed to help Olivia can be raised before her second birthday next summer. And I'm delighted to say Colm O'Rourke is here with us this morning to help us raise the profile of this and talk a little bit about Leitrim. But Colm, we've got a great picture of the most devastating full forward line in Meath football history. Yourself and Brian Stafford and Bernard Flynn are auctioning off your last 3 Meath jerseys here.
Yeah, we decided to do something for Livi. We have been doing a bit already, but we were asked to do that. They're a bit tighter on us at this stage, but it was great even to get the lads together for a photograph, and it was as if we had never parted. You know, every time we sit down together, it's as if we have just come in from a training session or a match, and we're sitting around talking about the last game or the last training session. And that's how easy the conversation flows.
There was an understanding that the three of you had in terms of being able to find each other with the ball. Was that always there? Was that there from the first night, or was that hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of training?
Well, I'd say it was just constant training together. I suppose we played about 6 years together, and we all played nearly league and championship matches, and we played at pitch openings, we played at everything. So sort of an innate understanding of what each other were going to do developed. You'd get to know if you had the ball, where one of them did make a dummy run and then they'd make the real run, and you get to know that. So before they would actually make the real run, you'd be putting the ball there and they would normally be there. Sometimes we used to give out to Bernard for being in behind his man, and we'd slag staff for being a bit slow off the mark and things like that. But that was just the fun of it, and we had great fun. I think that was the most important thing of all. We really enjoyed each other's companies and still do. Yeah,
that is great, and it's really clear from looking back at any of those old matches that you had a great understanding as well. So it's for a great cause, and we'll tweet out that link and make sure that anybody who is interested in bidding for those jerseys will get the opportunity to do it. Colm, we have you on today because we're doing Leitrim's Sporting Mount Rushmore, and but for an accident of birth, or maybe not even an accident of birth, you are actually a Leitrim man technically, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Leitrim and spent the first 8 years of my life there, first 9 years before we moved to Meath. We moved to Meath in 1966, so my older brother, Fergus, played a lot with Leitrim. He played for Leitrim in the Connacht final, actually. He was unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he would have been about 12 or 13 years older than me, or maybe more, and he played with Leitrim and finished his career with Leitrim around 1970.
So if your parents had just moved a little bit earlier, he would have been a Meath man as well?
Yeah, well, he played with Screen at the time in Meath, and went back to play county football in Leitrim, which was a bit unusual, I suppose. The club in Leitrim that my older brothers played with, Havas, had been quite successful and won 2 senior championships in the 60s. So a couple of my older brothers had played with them in those senior finals. So it was a sort of an unusual thing in the family that the older members of the family would have been sort of more of an allegiance towards Leitrim, while the younger members like myself obviously had no experience of playing football there, so our allegiance was to Screen and Meath.
You wrote a beautiful piece in the Sunday Indo, I think in 2019, about going back to Havas and seeing the devastation effectively that emigration had wrought on the small town.
Yeah, well, I think it's very sad. I went back there, and a couple of my brothers, and we went back to the school where we all had started going, and the school is now closed, and the church close to the school is closed, and I think there was 3 or 4 national schools at one time back 50, 60 years ago, teeming with young people, and I think there was 3 young kids starting in the national school. All the schools closed except one in the parish. And I just thought the whole thing of rural depopulation was very, very sad, and sort of a community crying out for young people. Immigration and population movement had decimated the county in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and it's happening again now. There used to be big families, of course, at that time. There was a lot of very big families. There was 12 in our family, and it was a fairly common thing at that time, rural farming communities. That's all gone now, and of course it has had a knock-on effect on the GAA club too.
I'm sure it has, and on the schools and on the ability to keep teachers and to keep people living in the area, and it's just kind of as a bit of a vicious circle, and all of a sudden there's nobody there anymore.
No, and I'd love to see some sort of effort made to sort of, and it has happened in some countries. I remember Harry Bohan championed the cause in Clare of getting people to move from Dublin to try and bolster these communities, and they have been doing it in Leitrim with some of the villages, but obviously people who move from Dublin are not going to move to a rural setting, but if they move to the sort of towns, the smaller towns, it give a huge boost, like your shop, your post office, the pub. The whole community benefits from young people. And unfortunately, rural Ireland and Midwest and a lot of parts are just dying on their feet.
We had Michael Dignan on last night, and we've been playing good bits of it this morning again. There was just one line in the middle of it where he was talking about in the middle of the pandemic and the issue of homelessness, and how, and we were talking about this earlier on, people are back sleeping on the streets again when you're cycling into work, and for 3 months somehow we managed to deal with that. It was like there was a will all of a sudden to get people off the streets because it was dangerous. I kind of just hope that the opportunity that we have now to think about how we live, and forcing everybody to go into the office all day the way they did in the 1950s, maybe this is an opportunity to promote the idea of living in these towns. If there was a little bit of broadband, people could live there and travel into work one day a week and then live in Leitrim or live in Kildare or live in Meath for the rest of the week.
Absolutely. I think that what this pandemic has brought about is what our view of society is to be, as rather than a sort of nation of consumers, and what sort of relationships we're going to enjoy and what sort of communities we're going to build. And the GAA has been always very strong in that regard, and Michael Dignan, I heard part of his interview, and of course he's been very strong on the whole training thing as well, and I would share his sentiments there. But definitely, what is society? And I hope that this government is radical. I think as you're supposed to be a socialist as you get young, as you're younger, and then grow out of it with time. But I have sort of gone the opposite way, and I think that an element of socialism where community trumps everything has to be at the forefront of all policy. And I think we in the GAA have been very good at that sort of thing, is that everybody works for the common good. And I would like to see that we would develop more of that in our society, that it can run alongside a capitalist system where people can earn and do well and make money from good ideas and working hard. But at the same time, always, the society and community has to be at the forefront. And it's first and centre, and always in front of individual gain.
My fear, it's growing into a terror, is that we're going to miss this opportunity. That everybody feels that way right now, but that I'm stuck in traffic on my way home if I don't get if I don't cycle in, and it's like, this is miserable. 3 weeks ago it wasn't. Is there any way that we can all kind of come together and begin to at least express what a shared vision for that might look like?
Well, I think the first thing would have to be a sort of a basic infrastructural change towards public transport, and that a system of commuting to and from work which is easy and fast and more enjoyable, I suppose. But that's going to take a generational change, and it's something I won't see in my lifetime, because it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years, I think, to do that. But first of all, you must start with the big idea and work towards it. And lots of other European cities have seemed to be able to build societies where work and leisure time are easier than in Ireland. In rural Ireland, in places like where I live in Navan, you don't have those sort of difficulties, so you can have an easier lifestyle. And I just couldn't live in a city now, and I spent a lot of my youth in Dublin, but I think the quality of life of living outside big cities is much greater, particularly with things like traffic.
Do you feel like the GAA are doing enough at the moment to have that conversation about what the big idea and what the shared vision for the future is?
Well, I think that they need to get involved in the development of planning policy. It's an idea that I've had for a while. If you take in Meath, for example, this is going to be a standard thing, that the new guidelines for one-off housing in rural areas is you're going to need, I think, a minimum of 25 acres. So it basically will mean that the farmer and the farmer's sons will live in the rural areas, but new people, there'll be no new building allowed in that. So I think that the GAA should be getting involved in planning to try and encourage the development of villages in all the areas. For example, in North Meath, where population is beginning to decline, and Meath is looked on as a county where the population has gone from something like 90,000 in the late 70s to almost 200,000 now. But at the same time, there's rural depopulation. And that has going to have a huge effect on the GAA, particularly in the North Meath area. And it's the same in every other county. So I think the GAA should be working with the planners to develop some sort of village-type structure in almost all areas. Obviously, it's to do with water and sewage and things like that. But if you put 100 houses in a community, well-developed community blocks, imagine the benefit there would be for the local school and the local football club, and the sense of community that would develop in an area like that, rather than having a blanket ban on building, because what that is going to mean is that a lot of the rural clubs are going to have great difficulty in fielding teams in the future.
They will just disappear.
Yeah, and what you're going to be looking at is amalgamations, and I think, you've seen that in South Kerry and lots of other rural places, that even though the population of counties may be going up, the rural club has been destroyed and the game becomes an urban one. That wouldn't be good for us, and I think that that is a planning policy. We're absolutely dependent on what planners decide. Maybe the Greens will go back and say that we're better off to live in some sort of smaller communities. I hope that is the way forward.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense as well. Just to round out what Dignan was saying about counties training, he was saying kick any counties that are caught training out and actually make rules but stick to them. Absolutely.
I'm a school principal, and I realised a long time ago, there's no point in having a sanction or having a rule if you don't have a sanction. If you do X, you get Y, and it works very simple, and everybody understands that in life. And if you're going to have a training ban, and yet counties are flouting it openly without sanction, then the whole thing becomes a joke. And what has happened now is that we've got the worst of every world. We have the counties training in some places and the development of a club championship structure which has been squeezed so tight to ensure that it finishes quickly, that fellas can get back to training with the county team. I thought we might have learned something, but obviously there are a lot of places where county executives don't understand that the real reason for their existence is to promote football in clubs rather than the elite of a county team.
Yeah, and to go to Congress and enjoy the day out. Leitrim, let's just finish with Leitrim. Packy McGarty, Mickey Quinn, Eddie Leddy are all in the mix. Who do you think of when we talk about Leitrim's greatest sports people?
Well, Packy McGarty is still alive and well, and he has a couple of grandsons actually in St. Pat's in Navan, and they are very good footballers. And my brother Fergus always said that Packy McGarty was the best footballer he played with. And that he was an outstanding player and would have been in any era. So I think that he probably will be the leader of the pack in that. Seamus Quinn was there, and Mickey Quinn and Mickey Martin. There was a lot of good footballers in Meath or in Leitrim, and I think that they loved their football as much there. I think when they won that Connacht title back in the 90s, you saw the effect that it had on the whole county, and it brought people from all over the world back just to say that they were in Croke Park to see Leitrim the day they played Dublin. Of course, Declan Darcy, captain of that team, has made a massive input into football in Dublin. I was slagging him last week when I met him that he should go back and do the same for Leitrim now that he's finished with the Dubs. hopefully he's a marvellous man, very involved in Clonagale Fontenoy on the girls side of it, and Dublin underage girls. So he's made a massive contribution to football in Dublin.
Yeah, it's a harder gig in Leitrim, I'd say. Colm, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks a million for making the time for us.
Thank you.
It's Colm O'Rourke there giving us some thoughts on his Leitrim heritage and Leitrim tradition. Marchas, I do wonder if there's like a future in the granny rule for some of these counties to actually make it a little bit more competitive.
I was listening to Colm there and I was nodding so vehemently I thought my head would fall off my shoulders. Like the thing he said there about planning in rural clubs, like if you take it, for example, the county he's from, County Meath, and the county I'm from, County Galway. He mentioned, for example, rural depopulation, trying to get people in. At the same time as well, we also have issues of preserving our own cultures, our own identities in every county, and that's getting more and more difficult. Like if I wanted to go home to Carrow tomorrow to build a house, I probably wouldn't get planning. DG Carrow had a programme a few weeks ago talking about how difficult it is to get Irish speakers to live and prosper in these areas because you can't get planning permission, you can't get broadband, you can't get in and out of Galway City, you can't live there and have a life as well as you would in other parts of the country. So it's very, very difficult to get these people back into these counties. County Meath, actually, interestingly, there's a campaign going on at the moment. Not many people know there's a teeny tiny Gaeltacht in County Meath called Rockcarron. And at the moment, they're having a struggle. The planning permission has been awarded to a large housing estate for 30 people, for 30 houses and a hotel, I think. And there's no language obligations. They're thinking we're trying to keep our culture alive. We want to bring people in, but we want people to come in who's going to assimilate and speak Irish. It's very, very difficult to control if you've got 30 houses all of a sudden for sale within the Dublin commuter belt. So this is where, the trouble with the granny rule. In the meantime, then, you've got the Leitrims, you've got all those counties in the middle and Leinster as well. They're dying off. I'm not so sure it's to do with lack of population a lot of the time. It comes back to the bigger question as well, which is lack of game time, lack of fun, lack of any kind of ambition. Like when you're thinking about it, if you're from a county that's not going to be there or thereabouts, there's a lot of lads out there now who are thinking, why bother? I can just do some other sport. And I'm not sure any granny rules going to fix that.
Well, Michael Duignan's manifesto for the next president of the GAA that he unveiled unwittingly last night, hopefully will be the start of a conversation about all that kind of stuff, because there was in the midst of that the whole competitive imbalance, that conversation, there's a tangent there as well that we could easily have spent an hour on this morning. So listen, great stuff, Maura Chassa, thanks very much for being with us this morning. We're going to be going to the Leitrim Mount Rushmore in just a moment. It's 20 minutes past 9 exactly. Leitrim's Mount Rushmore is on its way. It's the 26th county in our tour across the country. Tommy Conlon, Sean McGoldrick and Emma Mulligan are going to join us to discuss. First though, delighted here on OTB Sports to tell you about the latest chapter in the 20 by 20 campaign. It's all about participation. 20 by 20 wants all women in Ireland to know it doesn't matter what you do, it's about you just moving. OTB Sport is proud to support 20 by 20, hashtag can't see, can't be. Have a look.